I am sitting here with my wife, Kathy, who is the owner, sole proprietor of RKA Motorcycle Luggage since 1985. And she's going to discuss about her motorcycle she's had over the last 40 years. So, Kathy, you go right ahead and just start talking.
I started to learn to ride in 1985 on Richard's old Suzuki. It needed some work done on it. The brakes, front brakes, rotors were warped and just needed a little work. So I ended up borrowing my sister-in-law's Honda 650, which ran perfectly. And I spent a few months on that, learning to ride that. Not sure if I took my license on that or after we got the Suzuki uh, repaired, but anyway, so I got my license toward the end of that year, and Richard and I proceeded to ride often uh, and went as many miles as we could possibly go on the weekends around Sonoma County, Lake County, because we have these beautiful roads in both counties. And after a few years, it was obvious that the Suzuki really needed to be replaced. And in 1987, I believe, the Hurricane 600 CBR came out, and it was quite the sporty little sport bikes as sport bikes were becoming popular. Uh, our local dealer had a couple of them, and every time I went into Santa Rosa, I would go by the dealership, throw my leg over, and dream about possibly getting that bike someday. We weren't exactly in the position to do it, but we lived up in Lake County on Cobb Mountain, and I was waiting for Richard to come back from Santa Rosa, and some friends were going to spend the weekend with us. In fact, the man that repaired my Suzuki, uh, Wink and Stella. So, I'm kind of getting things ready for them to visit, and uh, Richard came in to see where I was at, and I was out on the back patio, and handed me a card and had me open it. And it had a set of keys in it. And I looked at him and I said, "What's this for?" And he said, "Go out into the garage." And there it was, black with the red stripe, CBR 600 Hurricane. And I loved that bike. It really added to my riding pleasure and skills. Spent a lot of time for 4 years riding that bike all over. And we alternated who would get the next new bike because we were using them for advertising in our business. And as it turned out, it was my turn. And we had Suzukis and Hondas, and the Ducatis were becoming quite popular and in racing also. And the 906 came out, and there was a blue one down in San Francisco, and we decided to get that. Richard had to ride it home because it was a little too tall for me. It took a couple of days for me to figure out how I would try to get my first ride on it before we got a lower seat. So we took it down to Tubbs Lane outside of Calistoga, and there was a curb on the side of the road. And Richard rode my Hurricane down, or I rode my Hurricane down, and he rode the Ducati down. And we pulled up to the curb, and I said, "I think I can do this, and I'll just make sure I come back to where the curb is so I can stop the bike and be able to get off of it without falling over." And mission accomplished. And I took off, and it took a while for Richard to get back on my Hurricane and catch up with me. And of course, loving the Hurricane, I didn't think I could enjoy another bike quite as much. But the Ducati was so much fun to ride. You know, the big twin, the sound it made, it was just a pleasure. And I rode that for around 7 years.
So Kathy, your 906 story is really not over, because right after we got that bike, we took a vacation. And I think if there's anything on that vacation that I would like you to talk about, would be Mexican Hat.
Yeah, we had the Hurricane and the 906. And we decided that we would switch off every other day and ride, you know, I'd ride the Ducati, Richard would ride the Hurricane, and back and forth. And of course, we head out, we go into Utah, and there's a little town called Hurricane. So every hurricane that's ridden through that town goes by the post office and has its picture taken in front of Hurricane, Utah. We went up through Zion, then we went on the north rim of the Grand Canyon and spent the night. Avoided getting any penalties because we had a highway patrol sitting just outside of town waiting for us to depart, because somebody reported that there were two bicycles riding really fast coming into the park. It's a long, sweeping, twisty road, but there's like RVs and cars and a 45-mile-an-hour speed limit. So luckily we had spotted the highway patrol before we did anything illegal, and we just cruised out and waved at him as we went by, and we kept it right at 45 the whole way out of the park. As we traveled, we went to the Four Corners, and we were going to go through Monument Valley and stayed at the motel that all the photographers stay at and watch the sunrise come up over Monument Valley. And what's funny is, you know, that's when, you know, the video cameras were becoming popular. And so Richard's videoing, I got my still camera. And of course, just as the sun breaks the horizon, all you hear are shutters going off. So that's kind of funny because all the video will have the shutters going off during this beautiful time. So we load up, we head out. We're going to end up over at Mexican Hat to get gas, and then go over the mountain to the Bridges National Park. And it's about a 3-mile climb with elevation. It's pretty much back and forth switchbacks, not real tight switchbacks, but it's dirt. And we had been told by friends that they did it and it was easy, no problem, on their bikes. So we asked a local guy, had he been up that road lately? And he said, yeah, it's just fine. Well, we get there, and I think it was my turn to ride the Ducati, but once we got to one point, I said, Richard, why don't you ride the Ducati? Because it was going to be a struggle for my hands to, you know, keep shifting and getting the bike in the right gear. So he ended up being on the Ducati and I was on the Hurricane. But as we progressed, the road was awful. It was washboard, not just little ones, but fairly deep washboards. We ended up staying as far over to the edge. Of course, the edge is down into the flatlands, which terrified some people. And we actually ended up moving over to the wrong side of the road. There wasn't really a lot of traffic that we had to worry about. But we managed to get through all that washboardy back and forth up to the top of the Bridges National Park. And of course, it was well worth it because, again, one of our lovely natural wonders in the world is Bridges. But you never believe anybody that's in a cowboy hat, a Mexican hat, telling you about road conditions. Years. But in between those 7 years, I got a Transalp that was way too tall also. Enjoyed that immensely. Then for business, we bought the BMW Fundero, a small 650, I believe. Yeah. And developed a luggage system for it because it was kind of unique and luggage didn't come with it. So we developed this system and started selling a lot of them. And we just assumed we'd sell the bike after we got all our photo shoots done and luggage development. We ended up keeping it because we both really enjoyed it. Richard had a Transalp also. And after the Funduro, it was so much easier to ride on the back roads than the Transalp. Before we got the Funduro, the Transalp got to go to Mexico on a Pancho Villa tour down to Copper Canyon. And we had friends from Massachusetts that came out, both experienced off-road riders. Sure, I wasn't at all. You know, there will be a few other people there, men. Courtney and I were the only women. But it was quite the adventure. And there were some long days and difficult days riding, but seeing from El Paso, Juarez, all the way down to the Copper Canyon was a beautiful way to see that part of Mexico. It was the state of Chihuahua, so there was a lot of terrain changes, and I had a couple of fallovers. One was definitely the biggest in the river, hit a rock, and there was no saving it, so a few of the guys ran out, picked it up. I trumped through a fairly wide river with my boots and arrow stitch on. They got it up this muddy hill, hopped back on, and away we went. And about 12 or 15 hours later, we ended up at our motel, covered in grime and dirt because there was a lot of dusty back roads through the mountains and then a road that was being repaved. And we were literally covered in dirt. There's probably a photo of us at the motel. But I was a happy camper then, and the group that went with us were a group of Australian men who, from school, would go on adventure holidays every year. Well, they didn't expect two women to be on this and were kind of grumbly about it first. But after that day, that was our second or third day out, I was awarded the koala bear on my handlebars the next morning. So I fit right in, and we just kept riding and ended up down in Copper Canyon, which is a beautiful old mining town, silver mining town, and it's just very small, very quaint. But you go from 8,000 feet down to sea level, so it's quite the ride down, and enjoyed that quite a bit. And I ended up, we both ended up selling our Transalp, and I sold mine after I had it 7 or 8 years. It was already 4 or 5 years old when I bought it. Sold it for exactly what I paid for it. And the people were delighted to get it. Kind of an odd bike, but kind of a collector's item too. So after being on the Ducati all those years, and as I aged, my hands started not operating real well, a lot of pain. And the Ducati position was a, leaned over uh, sport bike style, and the brakes were hard to maneuver. The clutch was a dry clutch. I was starting to not feel the joy of riding on that bike anymore. So we started looking for something in the more upright position, and we came across MZ Scorpion down at one of the motorcycle shows in LA. And it was just really cute. It was yellow and still kind of sporty looking, and the position with the handlebars felt terrific after the Ducati. So we were able to load it up and bring it home with us. And at that point, after riding it a few weeks, I said, "Oh, this will suit me just fine." It was a single, had no horsepower, but it was fun on the back roads. I actually got to take it on the racetrack once or twice and really enjoyed it, even though it wouldn't even hit 100 miles an hour, but that was okay. I ended up selling the Ducati, and probably cried more when I sold that. But when you can't ride a bike anymore with pleasure, that's the time to move on. A few years after that, Suzuki came out with an SV 650 and a 1000 twin. And I was kind of hooked on the twin scenario, and found one in Marin, threw my leg over it. It fit me perfectly, didn't need a lower seat. Of course, I needed a different seat because they're notoriously uncomfortable from the factory. We always got Corbin seats that were more comfortable and helped me lower the seating position on the bikes that I needed to have lowered. So that bike turned into a little hot rod. We kind of updated some of the things on it and made it perform really well. And they were starting to race them locally in the club racing. And I never did race, but I started doing more and more track days. And I was kicked out of the C group fairly quickly and promoted to the B group, which I hadn't intended to do. But they said, "Kathy, you just have to move on. You might be the slowest B person, but you're way faster than the C group." So I delightfully joined the semi-big dogs, actually really good riders, and learned a lot just by being in that kind of group too on the racetrack. And I really, really loved that bike, but we were thinking after 11 years, we maybe should get another bike. Richard had progressed to a BMW ST and was really enjoying that. Not quite as sporty as the TL or the Ducati 900 that he had had, but it was time to go to more of an old man's bike, as we joke about. And I saw the F800R at one of the motorcycle races. It was the stunt rider that does all these fancy tricks on the bike that look impossible. But I thought, gosh, that's really a cute bike. It's kind of sporty. It's got enough tire to last all day on. And we shopped around. I ended up having to go to Sparks, Nevada to Sierra BMW to purchase it. And it was a little tall for me then. My management for being a little short was wearing boots too big for me, usually a man's boot until they started making women's boots realistically, and gave me more toes. So that helped And as soon as I got on that and we headed across the Sierras to end up at a wedding, I was totally in love with this bike. And it was upright, it handled beautifully, it had ABS braking on it, which I experimented with, and it really does work. And just enjoyed that greatly. Got to take it to the track more than a few times, rode it as good or better than the SV. And that was finally, I decided to go ahead and sell it. My hands had never gotten better, they just got worse, and we were headed into the pandemic, and it was a good time to maybe go ahead and sell it and get a nice price for it. So I ended up doing that, and knew that I probably had to make a decision about riding another bike again. And as it turned out, BMW came out with this very cute G310R. They have an R and a GS. Well, the GS is an off-road looking bike, not hardcore off-road, but that style of GS bikes. But the R was sporty, had a great paint job, and I got that. I really haven't ridden it that much since we moved to Cloverdale, and we're downsizing our stable of bikes, and we're down to just that one bike. But for Richard, it brings back his racing days on these small 250s, and he can take it on a short little trip, secret road trip, that can be about 10 miles, and you can just go back and forth, and he really enjoyed it. So that's kind of the end of the motorcycle story for me. People say, well, get one of those three-wheelers. Not interested. Doesn't appeal to me. We got into bicycling, so that's a good way to get around and have fun outdoors also.
Okay, Kathy, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to sit down and talk about all of your motorcycles that you have over the years, and the trips that we made and the trials and tribulations that you had. And if there's any women non-riders or new riders, I hope that this video has inspired you. Thank you for listening.
You're welcome.